two thumbs. One, let's bring Rick Goldsmith out. The golden thumb from Roger.
I love it.
And we also actually have a golden thumb for Shamiqua. We were hoping that she was here would be here today. That was the original plan, and then we were going to bring her in by Skype. We're not able to do that, but Shamiqua, we're streaming. If you're watching us, we just want to hear the applause from the audience for Shamiqua Holmes-Powell. And maybe you didn't come this year, but one year we hope that you can come to Ebertfest. But we have your thumb here for you, and we're going to send it to you. And just in I always disclose when I've contributed to any film. This was a film that I felt so strongly about that I contributed not to the film itself, or actually I don't know, it was through one of your, was it? Through the Kickstarter campaign. And the reason I contributed money to this film, because we get solicitations all the time, the reason I contributed was because of the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect. Over the years, they've taught us to be more sensitive to issues of mental health and to destigmatizing things that affect people's identity. And so what I learned from them, that's why I contributed to this particular film.
Thank you. Really, thank you so much, Chaz, for contributing, for inviting me and Shamiqua to the festival, for the inclusion here. It's a tremendous honor. And I mean, I think the fact that Alliance is so much connected with the Ebertfest is fantastic. And you know, what Shamiqua started, not just Shamiqua, because there's many people and organizations trying to get the word out about mental health, mental illness, and destigmatize it, has been fantastic. And I you know, hitched on for the ride for my own reasons. And I'm really glad I did and will continue to do. So thank you so much.
And now, we'd like to call Matt Fagerholm back out to the stage. He did such a good job yesterday. We're calling him out again to talk to you. He actually reviewed your film, and you two can have a discussion. We're doing something a little different today than we've ever done. They're going to have a discussion about the film, and then we're going to bring the rest of the panel on. We felt that these issues are so important, rather than have the smaller panels at the Hyatt, we're going to have the panel on stage here after the discussion about the film. So.
Well, thank you, first of all, for making this film. It's just so beautiful. And I love, one thing I love about Shamiqua is she's the voice that we need in order to see real change happen in something like athletics. Because when you have a voice of an athlete actually advocating for this, it's so much more powerful when you contrast it with something like the film Concussion from a few years ago with Will Smith playing that pathologist, having real research that was just ignored. He's like, well, he's just a voice from the outside. But here's someone who's actually an athlete, actually advocating for this. So how did you kind of first come to know about her and the story? I'd just love to hear just the origins of this.
You saw a newspaper article about in the middle of the film from Bill Rhoden in the New York Times, and I read that article in early 2012 about Shamiqua and her great career, which I knew a little bit about, and her struggle with mental illness, and then her stepping up to become a voice for mental health education and advocacy and anti-stigma stuff. And I just thought it was, first of all, very inspiring, but also I, like probably most people in the audience, most people in America, have mental illness in my family, with people close to me. I grew up with an uncle who was schizophrenic his entire life, and I kind of never knew why more wasn't done for him. And he had died recently, probably a year or so before I read that article. So it was on my mind. My own daughter was struggling for stuff through her teen years, probably beyond the normal amount. And it's all these forces came together, and I just felt like this is what I need to do and where I need to be. As a filmmaker, I had one kind of boost in the process, in that my friend from childhood, who you saw in the film, was Lon Babby, and we grew up together. I was best man at his wedding, and I knew that he was a big time agent, Tim Duncan and Grant Hill and Ray Allen, and Shamiqua Holtzclaw. So I picked up the phone and I told him what I had in mind, and he did an email introduction between the two of us, which I think helped to get the conversation started. But then Shamiqua and I had to kind of get to know each other. And in retrospect, I shared my own family issues with her. And in retrospect, I think that made a big difference because, she told me so, that she was wondering, why would I want to do such a film? And from that first conversation onward, we never had a conversation by phone or in person that she didn't ask about my daughter. How's your daughter doing? And we were just simpatico, I guess, at that moment, and from that time onward. So she trusted me with her story, and we went on from there.
She's such a powerful speaker, and she's so fun to watch in that sports footage. I'm wondering, how much of that did you have to sift through to find the best moments that kind of defined her approach to playing, and just, the first 12 shots in one game.
Right,
crazy.
right. Well, we were very fortunate there because you saw my interview briefly with Vince Cannizaro, who was her high school coach, and I, very early on in the process, got a hold of that first article by William Roden when she was 17, and he happened, his assistant at Christ the King High School in Queens happened to have the tape that some parent, I guess, probably took from the sidelines in VHS of that game, and both Vince and Bill Roden could talk about the game as if it was yesterday. Shamiqua could too, but I actually liked the telling of the two of them before I brought her into it. So we got that, and the people from the University of Tennessee were fantastic in digging through their archives, getting up both practice footage and game footage. And the WNBA, we ended up, working out an agreement with them for footage, so.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, too, about the involvement of Glenn Close as the narrator, just one of our greatest actresses. And because she said recently in interviews how she feels that Fatal Attraction added to the stigma that's surrounding mental illness. And I think I said in my review in the Calic that seemed like it was a classy move for her to narrate a film like that. So how did she kind of get involved in the project?
Right. Well, she certainly wasn't doing penance through
I know.
through narrating my film, but
totally.
I knew early on. Glenn Close has been a mental health advocate for several years now. Been very open, and her sister's been a mental health advocate. Her sister has mental illness, and together they've been very verbal. She has her own organization, Glenn does, called Bring Change to Mind, and I knew from the beginning that she was going to be my first choice as narrator, and I also knew that I couldn't really go to her until I had a script that I felt like was worthy of her narration. And so that was pretty late in the process. You saw a credit of Sharon Wood. She was my co-writer, and she had worked with me on a previous film, and she was just spectacular in terms of writing for film. And I also had advisors from the mental health community, including one particular advisor, Jennifer Barr, who's in San Diego, who is a specialist in bipolar disorder and has it herself. And together, Sharon and I would write script, and send it to Jennifer, and she'd say, oh, that's good, but that's not good. That's not, no, you really need to say this, and she would say it more wordy, and then Sharon would condense it, and we go back and forth until we finally got what we wanted.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you were telling me earlier in the festival how there was an earlier cut that and had a different ending point because it happened before what we see in like the final 15 minutes. And I'd like to ask kind of how that sort of transformed the whole
Right.
approach.
Well, really a crisis point in the film came where you see a crisis point in this film, but a crisis point in production, I mean, was when, I'm sitting there at home in Berkeley, and I open up the San Francisco Chronicle, and there's a little 2-inch article on the back page saying Chamique Holtzclaw is in jail. So it was like, whoa, wake-up call for me. And I got in touch with her, and I said, I knew she had a court date in a couple of days. And I said, I really need to come down. Actually, this was by text, because that was the way we mostly communicated. Generation difference. And in response, she wrote back something like, thank you for your concern. You don't really need to come down. And I knew what she was really saying was, I would really prefer that you didn't come down. I mean, I knew this was, a low moment in her life, and I imagined then that Rick Goldsmith and film meant, more high-profile publicity and embarrassment or whatever. But I did go down. I kind of, I consulted with friends. I felt I needed to be there, and she was very gracious when I was there. We certainly didn't do really any filming other than brief shooting in the courtroom. And then it was a period of time for several weeks that she had to sit with this. Is this really what I want to do? Is this really worth it to me? And I had to be patient. I had to also, consult with people and say, what's the right thing going forward? And after several weeks talking with each other, but I think for each of us, mostly consulting with our own support groups, she said that, it's more important to go ahead than to not go ahead. And we both felt, even at that time, and I feel even more strongly now, the film is better for it. The film is more impactful, it's more real, it's more powerful, and really says more to watch her go through the most difficult period in her life rather than retell the story of a mental illness and some of the struggles that she had experienced in the past. So I give her a lot of credit for that, for sticking with it. And it still was then, I just need to add one thing to that, which was how to get her to comment about that period. Because I felt like when I would call her up or text her, I felt like she didn't want to talk to me. And I think part of that was, he's going to unearth this stuff that I'm trying to get past. And I did actually speak with her therapist, and I wondered if the making of the film was going to be in any way counter-therapeutic. And one of my advisors that I got through the fellowship at the Carter Center recommended to me, and it was great advice. Speak to her, say you're going to ask her about this period of the incident, but you're going to do it once. And for the rest of the time, you won't bring it up. And I think that really helped, so we could address it on camera and then be done with it. And she wasn't always faced with Rick Goldsmith equals going back to that worst period in my life. And she was very candid for the rest of the shoot, and this is what resulted.
Absolutely. And we're starting to see, I think we're just starting to see films in the narrative realm starting to remove that stigma from mental illness, particularly bipolar. There's two films. One is Touched with Fire with Katie Holmes, and another is A Light Beneath Their Feet with Madison Davenport. That's an amazing film. But with this film, there's so many ways this can be used as a teaching tool as well. And I'm wondering kind of where you see this film kind of going from here as far as educate. And you had that wonderful event yesterday on the campus.
Right. So it's been out now for 2 years. It was 2 years ago this month that it premiered at the Nashville Film Festival. And since then, I mean, we've played in a few film festivals, but I think much more importantly, we've played at various mental health gatherings. Right out of the box, there was a suicidology conference that I showed it at, and then there was another event in Memphis put on by two pastors at a church called Suicide in the Black Church, and it was fantastic kind of it was a tool there. The conference itself was fantastic because the Black church and the mental health community were not always in sync on issues of mental health. And I think this one church in Memphis was really trying to bridge that gap. And so we came along at the right time. They were having a conference more or less annually for several years, and we showed it there. And then it was sports psychologists and mental health groups like NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, and Mental Health America. And we're getting it into colleges and high schools and sports groups. And we've made some inroads into the NCAA, a lot through the sports psychologists. And we're trying to make that a little bit more formalized. And also the NBA and the WNBA. So that we still have a long way to go to make the impact that it can make. And the last thing is that Shamiqua comes out. And she had foot surgery a couple of weeks ago, and that's why she's not here. And she just couldn't make the trip. The travel would have been too much. But she has come to many of the gatherings. So we're often up here on the stage together. She sometimes is with the film. I went on a southern tour, so I was in the southern states at the same time that she was on a tour of Maine with the film at 4 colleges and speaking. And when she is there, it's really an added presence because, well, you saw. You can imagine what it would be like if she was then here speaking to you as well.
And
Very powerful.
this is a good point to bring out our panel. I'm going to introduce the moderator, and he will introduce the rest of the panel. Eric Pearson is a professor of communication studies and the former chair of the communication department at the University of San Diego. And I want you can introduce the rest, but I know one of the things that you were particularly, Rick mentioned this earlier in the movie about the stigma of especially a Black athlete with mental health issues. So let's bring out the rest of the panel. Do you have the names?
Yes, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
you have to announce them.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to have our chairs come out so everyone can have a seat.
I'll gladly give up mine.
Yeah, no. We're all good.
Oh, okay. We got some.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm really excited to be a part of this because one of the great things with this festival is that we not only get to sort of spend time with one another and enjoy films together and the camaraderie that comes with that, we also get an opportunity to share information with one another. So the folks who are here who have just joined us, these are all mental health professionals. And so what we're going to do is have them give you their name, tell you sort of the organization that they're affiliated with. And I'd like you to give me a reaction to the film, and then we'll get into some more of the questions. And then there'll be time for you to ask questions as well. So.
Hi, I'm Julie Cartel, and I work with Rosecrans here in Champaign. I'm the clinical director, and I've been working with them for almost 20 years. And I had lots of reactions to the film and lots of connections in the film, particularly my experience of being a Division I athlete myself who struggled with depression, anxiety, chronic suicidal ideation. So I could connect with Shamika quite well. And then I also became a Division I head coach. And during my Division I coaching, early part of my season, I also, or years of coaching, I also struggled, but never let anyone know what was going on for the many same reasons that Shamika spoke about. And so I really connected to her piece about being an athlete and having to be really, really strong and not sharing anything with anybody, and just being an athlete yourself. For me, it was such an incredible mental challenge to try and manage pain, both physical pain and psychological pain, and then that began to feed right into my other challenges emotionally. So I understood that and connected with that very strongly.
I am Joel Mausagi. I am a counselor now at Parkland, and I'm also on the Champaign County Mental Health Board. I've worked at Parkland about 10 years now, but I've been working in the community as an outreach worker and a mental health worker for the last 30 years. On a personal note, I lost a brother to suicide, and I think he was always misdiagnosed, and so it was very personal to me as I watched it as a professional and also as someone who has lost someone to suicide. I have this semester at Parkland, I think if there is any other counselor here, because I know some of the counselors have been here, we've dealt with quite a bit of anxiety with our students and dealing with issues of depression and being misdiagnosed or bipolar or just so many different things that we're dealing with right now. But we'll talk more about it as time goes on.
Hi, I'm Carla Hunter, and I'm Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So I really connected to the movie and to Shamika's story as well because of my own interest in mental health in the Black community. And I'm using Black intentionally because there's so much ethnic heterogeneity in the community, so I'm using that intentionally. It's always been an interest in part of my program of research to understand some of the barriers that Black individuals face when seeking therapy. I know I've personally been on a mission to get my own family members into therapy and struggled with a lot of the pushback in spite of the fact that they acknowledge and know about the type of work that I do, yet push back against this idea of mental illness and have really extreme views about what mental illness looks like. And so I felt that this film would also resonate with them and really speaks to a lot of the research findings that I know about, a lot of the research findings that I do was really represented very well in the film. And so one of the things I would love to talk a little bit more about is some of the research I've done and that was reflected in the film around the strong Black woman schema, which is the idea that many Black women, if they take on that scheme and identify with that, they are less likely to seek help for depression, for mental illness, as well as suffer in silence. And that's seen as a badge of honor for many Black women as well. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a question that I think will help my understanding, but I think also will help a lot of the folks who are seeing the film. How do we know the difference between the everyday stresses of life and the stresses where we need to get help for what's going on in our lives? Because it seems like people are always trying to, that area is where the difficulty happens. So can you share so not only if we see it in ourselves, but we see it in the people that we care about, where is that area where it's just the everyday stuff and then it's like more than the everyday stuff?
I think that's a great question, and it's definitely something that ourselves as therapists and researchers struggle with. And it's interesting because you're right, there is an individual dimension. What is my capacity? What is my coping mechanisms? And when does it break down? When do I need to seek help? It's a great question, and I don't have a ready answer for it. What I would say is that it really spoke to me when Shamiqua in the film, she sort of said she had this experience where she was seeing her actions as outside of herself, where her behaviors were not connected to how she views herself as a person, how she views the people in her life that she loves. And I would say that's a really crisis point, when there's some action and some behavior where you're like, that's not me. That's definitely one where folks can seek help. Personally, I also have a lower threshold for what I consider the capacity for pushing against one's coping mechanisms. And so any dealing with loss, having trouble expressing yourself, any transitions in life are huge times. So I'm one that believes that you don't have to be in crisis to seek help. And therapy is beneficial even in the short term. It's an imperfect answer to your question.
And for me, what I consider doing or asking people to do is just really having those conversations. How are your conversations happening within your family system, within your friendships? If you notice that there is some lapse in it and you are seeing yourself differently, I would use my brother as an example, that he would come over to our home and he would ask, are you hungry? I mean, he wanted to eat something. And this was a man who was a multimillionaire, but he just would come to me as his younger brother, and he asked this one question a few months before he passed away. Who's older? I'm the youngest of four, but he couldn't come to that place where he saw me as the older brother and it was very difficult. And that's when I knew he was really in a really tough place. And my students come in finals, midterms, when there are stresses within the learning environment also kind of triggers a lot.
The other thing that I would add is that, how do you know kind of what is that normal, healthy stress that we all have to experience? It's a part of life, and it's good for us to have our bodies need to have some level of stress. But when does it move over to the place where it's not healthy anymore? And it is very individualized, but I think also as individuals for themselves, I had a very high tolerance for pain and stress. So it is very, very individualized. But when you begin to see your daily routines and how you have cared for yourself changing, when you're not sleeping as well or not eating or eating too much, it can be either direction. If you're isolating more, those kinds of things that they begin to change in your daily routine, is beginning to affect your relationships or your work. Early on, try and ask for help. You don't need to be in a crisis is really key.
You don't need a crisis. I mean, I think also self-medicating. I mean, we self-medicate with food and with sex and with lots of different things. Alcohol is very available, readily available, and those are all ways in which we medicate as opposed to asking or talking to someone else.
Go ahead. Yeah, I just, one thing to add from being involved with a lot of suicide prevention groups, and one of the catchphrases for those groups is that suicide is preventable, and it is true that 90% of the people, at least by statistics, that commit suicide have an underlying mental illness. One of the things that they bring out is that if you notice somebody who's close to you seems off, seems distant, seems you're worried about them, to bring it up with them. The fear of a lot of people is, if I bring up the notion of, are you thinking of taking your own life or doing yourself harm, that I'm going to cause it. And it's almost universally not true. It usually gives the message to the person that you care about them, that if they have been thinking about taking their own life, that's in their mind, and bringing it out in the open is ultimately helpful. And just, two things that they've stressed is, one, bring it up and listen to what people say. You don't have to bring judgment or helpful ideas or wise words. But two, you might offer, can I, maybe you should see a therapist. Can I help make the appointment, or can I take you to an appointment, or take you down to the college, mental health clinic? Some way to give a helping hand so they know they don't have to do all the heavy lifting themselves.
Where are we institutionally in this conversation? I'm an alum of the University of Illinois, and I'd have to say, when I was here as an undergrad, I don't even know if we had mental health services at that time. Now, again, I was here a long time ago, but I graduated in '83, and I wouldn't have even known where to go if I needed care. And so where institutionally, sort of where are institutions, I'm particularly interested in athletes, sort of how do they help, particularly these athletes that have a tremendous amount of, between practices and academic expectations and, in the film, sort of thinking about what it must have been like for Shamika to finish her college career and not have just the fortunes of her team, but an entire league sort of thrust on her shoulders. So I'm interested in sort of institutionally, where is the conversation around these issues?
Particularly for college athletes, I know when I was a college athlete many years ago as well, we didn't have the luxury of sports psychologists or sports therapists at the time. And so when I was going through my struggles, I didn't also know where to go and did not speak to anybody about it, including my coaches. I didn't want to risk not being able to play, because playing was one of my coping mechanisms. And then when I got into the Division I coaching, I coached at a small Division I school. We also did not have sports psychologists. The larger Division I, top Division I schools typically do. And they have trainers and doctors, so they have a little bit more of a resource to them, but the stigma often, as an athlete and just as a human being, the stigma still keeps us from talking about it. But there is much more out there now on campuses with the I did my internship on a campus where I really wanted to focus on sports and be a therapist for athletes understanding that competition. So they have their own counseling centers and resources all on campus, and many campuses now, all of them, as far as I know, have that, which is helpful.
We don't have a sports psychology center, but we as counselors at Parkland College will get a call from a coach or a trainer or an interested teacher indicating Joe's not doing so well, or he's not been in class for lately. Could you talk to him? Or the coach would come with him or her to our offices, and we'll have that conversation. At the U of I, my sister was there at the U of I when you were there, and she struggled with depression, and she found her way to a psychologist out there.
I'll also add that currently at the U of I, we have a counseling center, and the psych department has a psychological services center that offers, sometimes at a sliding scale, services to the community as well as the students. And the counseling center services, I believe, are free to the students. Now, the question of how the athletes access those services, I think, is a great one. I know the counseling center does a great job with outreach. I don't know if they specifically target athletes, but that's definitely something to keep on their radars.
I'm going to open the floor up to questions, so you can get your question ready. We'll get a mic to you. And while they're doing that, for Black athletes, how is the situation different for them in terms of how the organizations might run and how they might be in a different conversation?
So for Black athletes, one of the things that we know that was a little bit highlighted in the film was the isolation, being at the top of the game and the expectations for Black athletes. It's interesting, the stereotypes for Black people are very narrow, but one of them is being sportsmen and being an athlete. And I think the pressure of having to carry that creates a lot of isolation. And so in the literature, we talk about that as racial isolation. And also the unique stressors that Black people face, we know is stress over and above the regular everyday stress that people experience. So you're talking about multiple stressors, and as a Black woman as well.
So do we have questions out there?
Yes, we have a question from the balcony in the center.
Okay, I see you.
Get the lights up a little bit.
Thanks. This question is for Rick, and if you're unable to answer it because it deals with Shamika, then I completely understand, but you've obviously spent a lot of time with her over the last couple of years, because she mentioned in the film that she had her own struggles with alcohol, and she noted that both her mother and father had a lot of experiences with alcohol as well. So she seems to be definitely in a good place on the up and up. Did she find a balance between her medications and using alcohol, or is she not using alcohol at all now? And again, if you can't comment on that, I understand.
Right. Well, I'll just say briefly that substance abuse and alcohol was never actually a big part. I mean, I know we covered one period in her film, but alcoholism for herself was never a big issue, and I think part of that is just strength of character, and part of that is growing up with a mom and a dad to some extent, but a mom who, that was a lifelong issue, and and interacting with that.
But, I would like to ask our professionals about the sort of implicit sort of genetic connection that seems to be in the film. Is that something you can help us understand better?
Could you say a little bit more about the
Well,
implicit-
this is something that traits that sort of run in your family kind of thing, and that you have to, if you have people who have mental illness in your family, you need to be more concerned about it. And again, the film seems to imply that, her father may have passed it on to her, and I was just curious as to what the genetic connections are.
With many mental illnesses, we talk a lot about it, that we believe in the field that there is genetic predisposition. It's not, for most mental illnesses, almost all of them, there's not like a test you can run, a blood test that tells you. So we do believe that there's genetic predisposition. We also know it's connected to environmental factors, and we also know about the impact of trauma and what it does to the brain and rewiring the brain. And so for those of us that have grown up with trauma, we know that we view our environment differently, but that our brains can also be rewired with good self-care, therapy, and support. And so I think it's a number of factors that make us vulnerable. My father had depression. My mother had agoraphobia when I was in middle school, and a severe anxiety, alcoholism by my siblings, and drug use. And so I saw what was lying ahead for me, and when we were growing up, I made the choice not to go into drugs or alcohol to cope. I chose to try to be perfect, and by doing that, then I was safe. I was safe from my father, and it was also a very good coping strategy, and I could appear on the outside as if I was very successful. So I wouldn't have questions. And so I think all of those factors contributed to the challenges that I had growing up and as a young adult.
Yeah. I just wanted, on this kind of nature-nurture spectrum, I wanted to add that one thing that really made an impact on me during the making of the film, when I started, one of the books I read that many of you might know was by K. Redfield Jamison, and now I'm blanking on, it also had Unquiet in the title. Unquiet Mind? Okay. But at any rate, one of the things, so Katie Redfield Jamison is one of the probably most highly regarded experts around bipolar disease. She's a psychologist, and she also has bipolar disorder herself. And one of the threads that goes through that book is kindness. And she talks about different people that she's encountered in her life and how this person was kind of an asshole, and this person was kind, and how much the kindness actually affected her, really therapeutically. And that people, and I know this in my own family, you know, when you're going through heavy emotional struggles, you need a lot of help. And the difference that kindness can make among your support system, among the people around you, can be phenomenal. And you know, the flip side is not having that can be a real setback. So.
Question
Next-
to your far right, about halfway back.
There you go.
All right. As a licensed mental health counselor, I want to thank you for making this film. I think this is one of the best films I've seen about bipolar disorder. Also, I noted that Shamik happened to be diagnosed, or rather misdiagnosed, with depression. Could the panel comment on how medication or misdiagnosis and use of antidepressants can actually end up triggering manic phases or or hypomanic phases or episodes, which would then be the hallmark for bipolar or bipolar 2?
I don't want to
Panel.
It's complicated.
Did I just stump you guys?
Well, one of the things that, you know, so my focus is a lot on the research and understanding the background of the mental health side of it and how to train therapists to interact and things like that. So I cannot speak to that question.
I'm not sure I could speak exactly to the triggering. I do know with the different types of bipolar disorder, and you might, you know, the bipolar 1 side is more of the manic side that you typically see, and the bipolar 2 is maybe more the depression side, and maybe not as extreme. But I do understand that that can happen, that you can be, it's very difficult to diagnose, especially if what somebody expresses as their symptoms are just maybe one of the symptoms of the depressive side. And also the manic side or a submanic side, a lower manic side, people really enjoy. They don't find that as a problem because they find themselves being very productive and feeling very good. So it is hard in terms of the aspect of triggering another maybe a manic episode. It's a little bit harder for me to answer that question for you specifically.
Not answering the question, however, one of the things as a society that we seem to herald is that manic side. So when you're manic, say you're hardworking, you're getting it done, because that's what my brother would do. I mean, when he was buying buildings and buying property, he was at his manic phase, and everyone said, wow, this guy is kicking you know what. However, when he took a turn for it, there was something else. But in his manic phase, as a society, we're we encourage that. And we make it good.
The next question comes from your left at the back of the theater.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for this film. One thing that really struck me during the movie was when her friend, the bodybuilder, said that she didn't know any other women of color that had the same diagnosis she did that weren't in jail, basically. And I'm curious, I remember being extraordinarily relieved when Shaniqua's sentence came down that she had community service and a fine instead of jail time, especially because a gun was involved. And I'm curious, did her mental state come up either during the trial or during sentencing? And are there ways of approaching criminal justice that takes this into account? I imagine it's just as bad, if not worse, for men of color too, in terms of going to jail instead of getting treatment.
Yeah, you're asking a huge question. But in Shamikwa's case, she, you know, part of her advantage was that she was a celebrity. She had the means to hire a very good lawyer, and probably the vast number of people who exhibit strange behavior on the street, and even more so among minorities, are going to be viewed certainly by law enforcement as being bad people. Bad people have to be locked up. And in the criminal justice system, no more sympathy there either. So they often end up behind bars, and depending on what city you live in, either the Cook County Jail or the LA Jail is the largest mental institution in the country. That's the sad truth in America right now, that most people who commit crimes that may have really underlying mental illness are not treated kindly by the criminal justice system, and it's something we really need to pay attention to and we need to change.
Yeah, one of the things that we don't do well, it's restorative justice. We are much more about retributive justice, where punishment, punishment, punishment. What are the underlying causes of whatever the crime was? How did we get there? How do we restore this person back to the community, as opposed to pulling them out of a community, not dealing with the underlying issues, and then bringing them back into the community with absolutely no treatment? So those are things that we all have to be willing to change, that aspect of us, because retributive justice hasn't worked. Restore community.
Yes, we have time for one last question in the balcony in the center. Okay.
Thank you very much for this film. It was really marvelous. And my question is, you've just started now to talk about the political dimensions in terms of the results of mental illness and how to deal with it. What about the political dimension in terms of the causes of mental illness, such as the way men relate to women and the way the races have related, slavery and Jim Crow, those aspects of the causes of mental illness?
Again, it's a huge topic. I mean, what you've put I don't know that I could expand upon what you've just said. There are many, let's say, unhealthy aspects to our society, to our capitalist society, to the way we interpersonal relations, to the politics of today on the national scale. I knew that my job was to pick a topic, make it personal, and try to have a film that the discussion that arose from that film would maybe lead to some change. And that's what I tried to do, but it doesn't mean that another film, as maybe you suggest, wouldn't be just as important, or another continued discussion wouldn't be just as important.
I also want to comment and say that I hear in a lot of the questions being asked how to take this to the next level and how to go from viewing the film and appreciating it to enacting real change at multiple levels in our society, especially at the institutional level, where policies really govern how police interact with minorities, the fact that we still hang on to our social construction of race as one ways that we maintain racial hierarchy. And I want to join you in saying that this is something that we do need to take to a policy level, and it's not clear over all these years that we have known this data and have been aware of this data, how to get it to enact policy changes at the institutional level. It's a great question, and we ask it constantly, and the answer continues to elude me. And of course, some of us are doing that work already, and it's how do we move the system along enough to catch up to the data that we have, essentially.
Yeah, I want to thank you all, and I would like to leave with thank AIR for sponsoring the film and bringing the information to. I hope that we all sort of took something away from this, because I know for me, kindness has been a theme running through the festival, and I hear people who say, if just being kind, that's a start. Just being kind to one another is a start. So that's something beyond the policy we can all handle today. So thank you for being a part of this.